name's Mark Bowie. I'm the Deputy Director of the Centre for Palliative Care, and the Centre for Palliative Care being the sort of statewide academic education research and training centre for the state of Victoria, but it's auspiced by St Vincent's here and a collaborative centre of the University of Melbourne. For those of you who haven't been to a hot topic before, we run several of these over the year, usually 3 or 4 depending on demand and topics and things, and it's our great pleasure to have Libby here today, and I'll introduce her in a few minutes. First of all, just to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land that we're meeting on today, the people of the Kulin Nation, and just really to acknowledge their elders past, present and emerging people, or people who are of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander descent in the room today. As I said, it's a great pleasure to welcome Libby Moloney to our hot topic this afternoon. Earlier in the year we were looking at dying in the digital age, now we're looking at dying through the lens of somebody who it looks like they've started a business that focuses on more natural, more holistic community processes. So as Director of Natural Grace, it will be a pleasure to hear from Libby today. I think her presentation today will really be a testament to her CV, which really just says that she's really focused on culturally sensitive, family-led care and those sorts of practices around end of life and funerals. I think she's really keen to see communities connect to the rituals of death in a very holistic and natural way. And so it'll be exciting to hear from her this afternoon and to welcome her to speak. We've got Libby with us for about 45 minutes talking, then we've got time for questions, and there will be some refreshments afterwards where maybe you'll get an opportunity to see the sunset and speak some more with Libby afterwards. So welcome, Libby. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mark. I'm a bit short, so I'm going to sort of sit behind here for a minute until we get going. But if I wander around a bit, please bear with me. And also, because we're not amplified, if I drop down or anything, just wave an arm in the air and that'll be a trigger for me to lift my voice back up again. And I'm going to come around here already because the sun's... There we go. Is that all right for everybody? Okay, so thank you so much for that warm introduction. I'm absolutely delighted to be here. The work from a holistic perspective, from a family-led, community-based perspective is actually as ancient can be. But in context of becoming a mainstream thought or a discussion or a conversation has been the work of my teachers, of people over the last sort of really 20, 25 years, at least here in Australia, really starting to engage in this. So to be invited into a clinical setting is a great progress for my community and for my teachers. So thank you. I also ask you to bear with me a little bit today. I was just explaining to Mark and to Peter that my own community has been ravaged by death this week. We've had 2 suicides, 2 road traumas, all of them known to me personally, and one is a family member. So if you could bear with me tonight, I am doing my best. So it's nice to see your face, Miss Annie. So let's see how we go. Thank you for acknowledging country. I won't repeat that, but please be aware there are photos in my presentation that are of people who have died. So natural grace is a pragmatic response to a deeply ancient, deeply sacred experience of life, which is to die. I was widowed at 26, some 22 years ago, and I was, my husband and my family were cared for conventionally, very, very well by a conventional funeral director, who's now actually a competitor, but anyway, that's all right. And he wishes me well, all is fine. But when I woke up after my 10 years of deep denial that I was fine, I realised that there was a lot more that could have happened for Peter, that could have happened for our 2-year-old child. Excuse me. So out of that came, how do we do this from a place that was really real for me and for my family and for my community, and turns out for a whole lot of us. So that's essentially Natural Grace. We are located in Wood End, which is in central Victoria, but our reaching is much more broad now, and we have a care centre here in Flemington where we predominantly offer our infant specialist care out of a program that we're very proud of, and out of Creswick, and that's growing all the time, so keep an eye on our website. There's a little bit of a thing that we're only country funeral directors. We're proudly country funeral directors, but we do serve Melbourne, and the vast majority of our client base are Melbourne families. So we do the travelling, not them. We do practice conventional funeral service, but what we do is traditional funeral service. And it's a little bit controversial because it's like, I want a traditional funeral, which is coffins and handles and shiny coffins and all those sort of things. Whereas we actually think traditional is the ancient way, the way of our Indigenous community, the way of so many communities around the world who actually have done death for so long that we're a little drop in the ocean of ritual and ceremony and practice around death. And so traditionally we draw on all those beautiful approaches and try and bring them into a modern context. Ours is an integrated model of care. So what we do is we talk about, and I think did you happen? So this is our model of care. It's a very distinct process, if you like, or journey that the families who choose to come into our care. So we talk about integrating funeral care into the spectrum of care that all of you may already be working in. So we talk here about living well, and we talk a lot and we engage a lot with families about advanced care plans, about estate planning, wills, legacy documents, end-of-life wishes and experiences, and we love that work, and it's wonderful. And we find that what happens then is that it informs, as we all know, a good set of plans informs people living with terminal illness or just in the natural ageing process. And if that part's done well, then when we move into palliative care becoming a much more active part of that person's time till the actual end of their life, the active dying stage, their death, and then we sort of really, it's easy to say that funeral directors fit in, once someone dies, whereas in fact a holistic approach to funeral care, we're involved from way back here. And you might be a little bit mortified to know how many times I refer to palliative care, which is a bit of a worry and a bit of a reflection. Maybe what's happening more in the country, I don't know. But I'll have people, very, very, very ill people, come in to do a funeral plan, and I'll say, where are you planning to die? And they'll say, I'd like to die at home, love. I'll go, that's good. What's Pal Care saying? And they go, oh no. We're not in Pal Care, we're not dead yet. It's like, oh shit. So there's a lot of work to still be done. But so obviously that's our place here. Our most active time is here in from the time of death into after death, into the vigils and ceremonies, into disposing of the body, returning the bodies to earth, and into bereavement, where we tend to pass the baton to our bereavement colleagues. So our ultimate intention at Natural Grace is to integrate, to become a truly integrated member of that care team of a person. So that's essentially what we do. We do run off a series of principles that we have developed alongside of our colleagues, Victoria Spence from New South Wales, and Helen Callanan from Preparing the Way, who's an end-of-life doula educator, and others. So there's a set of shared principles. So essentially the question that I was asked to talk to you about tonight was, so you're dead, now what are your choices? Well, technically what are your family's choices, but hey, and there's lots of choices. But I think a really sensible place to start is to say, what are our obligations? Because there are things under law that as the senior next of kin of a person, you have to do when someone dies. And it may be that in your roles, can I just get a quick idea about who's in the room? Like, is there doctors, any doctors in the room? Thank you, Connie, that's great. Nurses and nurse practitioners. Yep, fantastic. And is there any doulas in the room? Yay, we love doulas. Great. And just generally interested people?
Care.
Pastoral care, fantastic. All pastoral care, wonderful. Yay, thank you. Cemetery representatives, thank you. Okay, that's great. Thank you so much. It's really good to know, because we have this exquisite moment either formally in our formal relationship with a patient, or informally as someone that's known in our communities as that lady down the street that knows something about death, which applies to pretty much all of us all the time. This has happened, who do we ring? And so it's really important to understand is what are our obligations for our own family members, but also what are the obligations of someone who we might be advising. So under Victorian law, and we are very fortunate in Victoria, we have very few actual laws that we have to abide by. And they are, quite simply, three things. The death must be certified by a doctor. If it's not, then the person would go to the coroner. And the doctors in the room and would know about, even in hospitals, I've had a palliative care patient in this hospital actually end up at the coroner because they had a fall days before they arrived here at the hospital. So the death must be certified by a doctor. And for the sake of the rest of our time together, we're going to assume that the death is an expected death. So to get into the whole discussion around sudden death is another thing, maybe over a G&T later. The body must be lawfully disposed of, and I am going to go into that a bit later, but the emphasis there is on the lawfully. And the third thing is the death must be registered with birth, deaths and marriages. So they're the only thing that the law in Victoria requires of us. So one of the things that it was in the headline of your topic, for example, was how long can you keep a body at home? We don't have any limits here. New South Wales, 5 days. Here, none. So there is no of these little tricky laws. In other states and other areas, the doctor must have seen the patient within the last, some places have got 14 days, some have got 4 weeks. We don't have any of those. It's doctor discretion as to when they most recently saw the patient. So we have these really simple laws here, which allows a lot of opportunity for us to explore our choices. So if we assume we've all accepted that those things happen, what else can you do? And just as a little taster, you don't need to use a funeral director. And if one of my life professional goals is to have hospitals inform patients that they can remove their person from the hospital themselves and that is legal. And it's pretty much unheard of. You can go to the coroner and collect someone yourself. There is no obligation to use a funeral director. And if all the people in the world to tell you so, it's me, because, I want you to use a good funeral director, but you don't have to, and it's really important for people to know that. And we particularly see the benefit of that information coming through in the paediatric environment, and of course for infants. But even for the elderly, for families to know that they can, if they want to, put the logistics out of your mind for a minute, technically they can. You don't have to have a funeral at all. As long as you attend to those 3 things, you don't have to have a funeral. A celebrant can be Uncle Bob or anybody. You don't need to use a civil celebrant like you do for a wedding, where it has to be an authorised person. And you don't need to use a coffin. And that's just the start of the list of the things that you don't have to do. So we'll jump in and explore what they might be. So historically, things have been fairly, pretty much as they are now, but just with a twist. So, the funeral director's called, the person's taken away, and there's a really interesting point at that separation point. And the impact and the damage that can be done to the long-term bereavement outcomes if that happens too soon. And if, on my deathbed, the thing that I will be most proud of will be the work that we've been able to do to keep families together when someone dies. And for that to be an easing off process, not an abrupt process. It's not the fault of the funeral industry, it's just how we do things, but it is time that it can change for those who want it to. The viewing would be held in the coffin, like that experience of a viewing, which is very much the person's in the coffin, often all painted up, nearly always embalmed, and lying there in a very sort of non-natural manner. But it's what we've done, and it's served the community for a long time, and it still continues to serve many in the community. Nothing that I'm saying this is different is therefore many that I'm criticising. It's just different. Classically, of course, services happened in a church with a religious connotation, and we still see that happening all the time. Families ringing in saying, can you find us a church, because he hasn't been to church for 40 years and you've got to go to church. And then when you say, well, no, you don't, everybody relaxes a bit. But there was nothing else, but we had that infrastructure, we had that societal infrastructure that religion did provide us for a long time. And now that our numbers in our religious communities are dropping so dramatically, what are people left with? So we had to come up with some answers to that. And then of course a cremation or burial would happen in a conventional manner. So what are our choices now, and what are they starting to look like? So I'm going to fly through some of this, and I'm going to concentrate, give a bit more time to some of the other parts of it. So to us, there's sort of 3 or 4 primary topics that I'd like to talk about. Home-based death care, natural burial and cremation options, and about family-led funerals. So we're going to just work through those. So home-based death care is all we had until about 100 years ago. Everybody died at home. They were cared for at home. The word funeral parlour comes from the front parlour of the house where the body was laid out. And if we look at the communities around the world that are still practising home-based death care, about how they know what to do in the structure of home-based death care, that there's a lady down the street in the village in Ireland who knows how to prepare the body, to lay it out. The community knew how to build a coffin. They knew how to put the coffin on the back of the cart or in the car and take it to the church and into the... So all these home care things gave us a structure through which to deeply integrate the death. There's a beautiful little film going around on YouTube at the moment. I'll send it through and see. And it talks about the Irish wake, and how at the mass or the funeral, everybody comes up to the bereaved family and they shake their hands and they say, sorry for your trouble, sorry for your trouble, sorry. And it's repeated and it's repeated and it's repeated. And the person that's explaining this about his father's death said, with every handshake and every sorry for your trouble, it impacted on him at every level. He has died, he has died, he has died. But it's done so gently. So what's happening now is we're really trying to encourage the return of home-based care after death. And what we're seeing is the evidence really now of years of families coming back and saying the best thing was washing mum's body. The best thing was that we had that private time together in vigil, so that when we came to the funeral, we were hosting the funeral. So families will come in quite distressed, and you can see it in their body language, and then they'll come along and then they'll wash their dead and dress their dead and be with them, and then out of that they step into, that was our time, that was our private family time. I love you, I'm sorry, I forgive you, all those things that we know we need to do, get this opportunity. It's really important to understand that home-based death care can happen in hospitals. I've done home-based death care in ICU. It's possible to, make it into all sorts of places, but of course it's happening at Caritas Christi, it's happening at Very Special Kids, it's happening in people's homes, and it happens for us in our sanctuary in Woodend, where families come and claim that space of their own. So it's not just this idea that someone only that dies at home can have it. It's an experience rather than a venue place. all sorts of wonderful things can happen, but the primary things that we have to be considering of are, caring for the body. How do we wash it and prepare it? But mostly around how do we keep it safe, which is to cool the body down. And I'll go into that in a minute. Holding vigil, as I've just sort of explained, I think is the absolute paramount outcome for families that, in our experience, that ancient thing of staying with our dead, of accompanying them until their spirit departs from their body or they sense the shift. And if you look back into ancient, without cooling and all these things, the bodies would start to degrade, and there would be smell and there would be physical changes. And what we know is that those things informed the deep conscious of the living that it was time to let them go. So over those few days, and if you look at the Middle Eastern Jewish traditions of burying within 24 hours, it's become a religious practice. But most likely what's true is that 24 hours in that heat, the body was going to change. So it was a pragmatic and practical response that then became a practice. Holding vigil, there's we draw a lot on spiritual communities, the anthroposophical community in particular. I don't practice that myself per se, but I steal stuff from everybody, left, right and centre. And it's fabulous, because if you look at, we use gold, frankincense and myrrh as anointing in our vigils, and that's clear where the Christian story comes to bring that. The anthroposophical community teach us about what happens to our conscious self and how we act as resilient human beings over a 3-day period, and how many communities around the world will practice death care over 3 days. Now, they didn't all get on and form a union and make an agreement about it. It's as ancient as you can imagine, and it's something about us as humans and what we can do over 3 days. And I see it and I just swell with pride and relief at seeing families go from trauma, despair, even in sudden deaths, through to that gentle starting to shift of acceptance, through to washing and preparing, through to the next 24 hours of being able to bring other people in and say, come and see my child, come and see my mum, and the pride of saying, it's okay, it's safe, come. And then they wake up on the 3rd day, and you might have even seen a beautiful essay that was written in Palliative Care Matters by a doctor whose husband died maybe 2 or 3 years ago now, and she talked about her keeping him at home. And she was gorgeous. She said, he's staying with me till the funeral day. He's mine, I'm doing this. And I said, that's fine, that's okay, of course he can, that's lovely. But if you change your mind, we're here, just give us a call. And on the morning of the 3rd day, she very sheepishly picks up the phone and goes, Libby, I'm ready. It's like, I'm ready. And something happens on the 3rd day. And I can't explain it, and I'm not an academic, so I'm not going to go and write a paper on it, but something happens on the 3rd day. And if that person's in the care of someone else, even if they're lovely, and by that I do mean the funeral directors, even if they're lovely, it doesn't matter how nice they are, they're not in the family's care. And how do we balance that? So,
what was that philosophy that you mentioned?
Anthroposophical. It's the work of Steiner. Yeah. And so it's Steiner's great for just plain old-fashioned good practice. Just good ideas. Doesn't matter what you attest to. It's just really good for stealing stuff. And look, I might offend people. I'm a crap Catholic, dreadful Catholic. But geez, it's good to die Catholic. It's really handy with ritual and ceremony and knowing what to do, and the culture and the community around you knowing what to do. But I'll go into that a bit more later too. Now, so this is Anna. She's was cared for by her sisters. She died at Bethlehem. And she was transported by them. She used our car. They used our trolley, but they wrapped her up and they walked her down to the car park and they put her in the car. And someone drove in the car, one of the girls jumped in the car with her, and we took her home and they claimed the space in her own home, and they washed her and dressed her and shrouded her. And the ones that were hesitant at the start came along. And eventually everybody was in. And do we need gloves? No, we don't need gloves. Oh, we haven't got no shampoo. Someone runs to Coles. You know, all these beautiful, natural, lovely things happening. You can see from her colour how sick she was. And this is Emmaline, who was the mother of two very beautiful little people. And her dying wish was to educate her community about vigil keeping. So just for one day, we brought her home, popped her into the front room. It started as a completely bare room, and her whole community of inner Melbourne came, and by the end it looked like a scene out of that Where the Wild Things Are, the kids' book. You know, it was just this massive sea of green, and the children would come and paint her nails. And the family, we had her shroud out in the kitchen, so everybody came and they sort of went through this sort of festival of Emmaline, and they would come and they'd sit with her, and if they were waiting, if someone else was there, they'd write in a journal or they'd write on the shroud. And then in her garden she had pre-prepared a whole lot of messages that she tied to the trees all through her garden. So everybody came and had an experience. Over 100 people came through the house that day. So, you know, huge community impact. So the most important thing I think about home-based death care before I moved on is how do we back ourselves up for that to be a sound and safe clinical practice? And the reason, the way we do that, and we do that naturally, is to use a cool blanket. So essentially what happens is we bring that little unit in, it's a little generator, and it pumps coolant into a pad that sits inside a sleeping bag. Now for that photo, because it's a stock photo, the person, that, you know, they're sort of all wrapped up, but generally we don't. They're inside a sleeping bag with the cool pad in there, but their faces are still out. And that cools a body to mortuary standard conditions. So it's 3 degrees, perfect, and they could stay there comfortably in their own home in one of those for a week easily, and we've done it for longer. Amazing. Best product ever. A little low word, no more than what you can hear, way less than what you can hear now. And it's a bit of a compromise, you can't gain that. But yeah, so that's what we use. They're 10 grand a pop, so you know we've only got 2. But they're amazing, and it's the adult equivalent of a cuddle cot. Has anybody come across a cuddle cot, the baby ones? Yeah. So that's how we back it up, because it's the idea is saying, well, you take all these ancient ideas, how do you make them modern and insurable and safe? And so we've had to invest in all that technology to make sure that in this climate, in this day and age, it's all very well to say, they'll be right. They won't. They won't just be right. A decomposing body can be an absolute trauma for a family, and it's our responsibility to make sure that we protect from that, and we have plans and plan Bs all the time for how we would change the plan if a body did start to decompose. So family-led funerals are the next little quick section I'd like to have a chat about. There's a lot of work done about family-led funerals, particularly by the home funeral, it's gone out of my head, advocacy network in the National Home Funeral Alliance, I apologise, in the States, and really about returning the practice of funeral care back into families. So ideally by the end of this time tonight, if you're in a situation where you're with a family and they say to you, we just want to have a gathering around mum. We just want to organise that ourselves. We don't need a funeral director to tell us that we have to go to a chapel or whatever. That you can say, yep, you can do that. If that's all that comes out of tonight, then for you, then I would be thrilled that you can say, yes, you can do that. If somebody, and you sit with a family group and you'll see that there's usually someone that's quite competent and can organise things. There's somebody that you can see is experiencing grief very deeply into their body, but they don't have the words to express it. So to say to a family, maybe you could build the coffin, or maybe you could be the one that pops down to the cemetery and walks around and chooses the right plot. There's so many jobs and so many things that can be done, and by removing them from the family base, it's kind, and what's considered kind to say, I'll take that from you, I'll do that for you, I'm helping you by removing that from you. Whereas in fact what we're removing is all their death rights, all the opportunities to to prepare the body, to organise the paperwork, to ring the priest or the celebrant, or to be the priest or the celebrant. So there's a lot of therapeutic benefit in families doing these jobs for themselves. And as holistic funeral directors, one of our indicators of a good day is we'll come back in, often after having been on the road for 10 hours, because all of this is lovely, but it's massively time consuming. And our practice manager will welcome us back, and she'll pour us a G&T and she'll say, "How did you go today?" And we'll say, "We did nothing." And she goes, "Yes, 2 G&Ts for you." So that's an indicator for us. If we've done nothing but hold that space and keep that family safe from whatever might come at them, and they've actually facilitated all their work for themselves, then we know we've done a good job for the day.
Attention all staff, respond MET.
I'm getting used to those things, but I never quite know. We don't have to worry too much about that. No, good. So with home-based funerals, one of the biggest things is avoid its filling in the secular community. That when going to church isn't suitable or appropriate or unavailable, then where else can funerals happen, and how else will they look like? So we could talk about this forever, but the fact of the situation is, in Victoria, you can hold a funeral anywhere that you've got the permission of the owner of the land to hold it. So we might ring, the Hilton, and say, "Can we do a funeral in there?" And they'll go, "Oh my God, you crazies," and hang up in our ear. Or they go, "Yes, madam, of course you can. We'd be delighted to welcome Mr. Bloggs, and yes, his coffin's most welcome." You just don't know what you're going to get. But it can be anywhere. We've done funerals in schools, we've done them in kindergartens, we've done them on the grass at VSK, we've done them at cemeteries, we do them at people's homes all the time. They can be anywhere, and they're really beautiful. The idea is they mean something to the person that's died and the person that loved them. One of our favourites is cemetery funerals. They're so beautiful. This is our country cemetery in Karlsruhe, just north of where we live, and they even let us have fires. So we have smoking ceremonies and mulled wine and toasted marshmallows and the dogs and people on their chairs, and they're incredible days. As I said before, you don't need to use a celebrant. Any of you can be a celebrant. This would have been one of the most beautiful little funerals we ever got to facilitate, and you can see this is the trustee from the cemetery. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 siblings, and they brought mum and dad's Wedgwood and their glasses and their little old 1950s picnic table, and they when they were ready, they filled the grave themselves. And when they needed a break, they'd sit down and have their picnic, and they'd get back up and they'd shovel more in. And mum was buried, dad had died previously, and his ashes were scattered with her in the grave. Just beautiful, absolutely beautiful. And what's lovely is these people all come back to us and tell us all these stories. You don't need to transport a vehicle in a hearse. They are kind of handy because they fit a coffin nicely. Our hearse is called Betty. She does a great job, and families will often come in the car with us and escort their person. But you can have a person transported in any vehicle, and they can be transported in any vehicle in their death without, coffins aside. If you wanted to come to the mortuary at St Vincent's legally, a family could come and take that person and put them in the back seat of their car and take them away. And one of the very frustrating things is when well-intentioned organisational behaviours, I'm just going to keep going here, say you can't do that, it's against the law. That's not true. It might be against the policy and process of the hospital, but it's not against the law. And it'll be a wonderful day when that becomes a clearer proposition. Things like flowers and the orders of service and all that stuff that you see at funerals, that's all a choice. You don't need to put a notice in the newspaper. That's a fallacy. It used to go around that you had to do it because it met some legal requirement. That's not true. You don't need to. One of the most lovely things is families bringing flowers from their own garden. Children bringing flowers from the school garden or from their street, and the coffins getting covered in little token flowers. It's beautiful. Coffins and shrouds. One of our sort of pat on the backs to ourselves is introducing a new range of coffins and shrouds to families, and also to introduce the practice and to really support the practice of a non-coffin burial or cremation. So coffins come in all sorts of shapes and sizes these days. That coffin is a beautiful New Zealand coffin. It's really designed in New Zealand and manufactured here. The shape of a tree, lovely handles. It's very much, we look after a lot of young people at Natural Grace, so this is appealing. But it's also our community coffin. So this coffin is the coffin that we lend to families at no cost to use for the ceremonial aspect of their funerals. When the person's finished, when the ceremony's finished, they come back into our care, get transferred into a shroud bearer, and that gets cleaned and used again for the next family. So environmentally it's really cool, but cost-wise it's a great reduction in cost, and meets a lot of that need of families to not spend money on things they don't need to spend money on. Cardboard coffins are dreadful. Anybody that tells you that a green funeral or a sustainable funeral has got anything to do with cardboard is rubbish. I should put a big cross through that sign. They're really bad. Our cemetery rep, they create an awful lot of ash. There's an awful lot of glue made in them to use them. So we don't stock them, and we're the hippiest funeral directors in the country. We don't stock them. So if people think that they need one of those, you can just gently say there's better options.
What makes them so bad?
Oh, the cardboard's manufactured overseas. We don't produce it here for ourselves in any quantity enough to make them. So the carbon miles are huge. There's still the processing of the cardboard to make it be weight bearing is significant, like it's so thick. And then the amount of glue that's needed to do that, even though it is recycled paper, that mostly they're dreadful in a crematorium. They create all this powdery ash. So you get the ashes back and it's contaminated by a lot of powdery ash. So yeah, they just don't think. They're attractive because you can write on them, which is lovely, but just a simple pine box does that just as well, and burns much more cleanly and is made in Victoria from Victorian grown timbers in a sustainable forestry approach. So wicker is very appealing to people. It's an English coffin. It's a felted wool, and it's very gentle and very elegant, and we call it the Ugg boot. You can make your own coffin. Families, that's a very therapeutic, really helpful process for families to make their own coffin. There are requirements from the cemeteries as to how to make them, and the bottom has to be flat and all this sort of stuff, but it's easily got around and a really lovely process. Shrouded burial is a beautiful process. So the community coffin would get used to place the person in their shroud, and then when we get to the side of the grave, we lower them in their shroud. So if you're thinking about what kind of options are available, and I wanted to tell you a little bit of a war story of a family who had their baby die. And they were in a Melbourne hospital, and they insisted on taking their baby home, as was their rightful position to do. And as they were in the hospital, and the hospital didn't have a protocol around taking their baby home, which is a little bit unusual, most do now, and this was a couple of years ago, they mentioned about how they wanted to bury their baby in the bush. And so what the hospital did, and I understand where they were coming from, the hospital rang the police and said the family is going to dispose of this baby illegally. And then, as life is sometimes, the police came banging on their door at 1 o'clock in the morning, demanding the return of the baby and threatening to charge them because they were going to unlawfully dispose of the body of the baby. Now, it's a bit of a war story, but the thing out of it is, if out of today we can share a little more death literacy about things like bush burial or natural burial, and the power of doctors in particular, but also of nurses and nurse practitioners, of social workers, of pastoral care, of all of us in any position of authority, to just have a weird look on our face and go, oh, I haven't heard of that, or that can't be right, or how do you do that? Because we simply haven't heard of it before ourselves. We have a responsibility, I believe, to improve our understanding And natural burial is legal, it's possible, and it's beautiful. And for all of us to be in this position to now say, instead of, oh, that's a bit odd, oh, wow, that's interesting, which cemetery are you going to go to? And that's your key clinically to assess, do they actually know that you still have to bury in a legal manner and that they can go to a bush burial section of a cemetery? But they can't just go out in the bush and bury their dead, which is what caused that problem in the first place. Genuinely, the midwives thought they were just going to go out into the bush and bury the baby, which you can't do. So that's something that I'd be keen for you to take away. Again, the principles of natural burial there, just sensible thing. It's more about what we don't do than what we do. That's what a shrouded burial looks like. I honour John Morrison there. It's really, on the surface of things quite confronting, but actually incredibly beautiful and so authentic to him that his family felt so proud.
Can I just ask, as that's going down, does anything go on top of the body before the dirt goes back?
Yeah, so we'll often encourage the families, again, depending on the relationship we've built with them and assessed for their comfort with things that can be really gentle, just to layer a layer of gum leaf over the top, so that when that first lot of dirt goes in, it's just that bit more gentle. But other families like, yep, we're burying you, Dad. It just depends on where they're coming from. It's not up to me, but yeah, we have lots of tricks up our sleeve for how we can shuffle that.
So legally, there's nothing that needs to contain body fluid?
Nope, absolutely not. People say to me, and I sort of could take the glory, but I don't. People say to me, oh, how did you change the law? And I go, I didn't, I just read it. It says X amount of soil over above the height of the coffin or the remains. And that's the law, isn't it, Annie?
Correct.
Thank you. So there's not. I think where it came from was the only criticism I suppose I have of the conventional funeral industry is they're actually coffin sellers, not funeral carers. And that a lot of their income stream from their business models comes from selling coffins. And they think I'm crazy, but I'm doing just fine. And it's because we sell time and love and compassion, and we're here to be of service, and we don't compensate for that by selling coffins. Anyway. So shrouded cremation is our big claim to fame. We introduced the practice of shrouded cremation when Dr. Sally Coburn actually interviewed me on whatever it was years ago, and she said her mother was claustrophobic and petrified of being put in a coffin, and she said, why can't I just wrap her and take her to the crematorium? And I was young and green and not as cocky then, and I said, oh, it's just the way it is, the law says it. And that haunted me for a couple of days, and I rang my mate Graham Fountain at Bendigo Cemetery and said, why can't we do this? And he rang me back and said some words that I won't repeat to you because it meant I was annoying, but essentially said, you're right, we can't. And now Ballarat Cemetery, Greater Metropolitan Cemetery Trust, which is all through Melbourne, and all regional Victorian cemeteries now offer the practice of shrouded cremation. And that's what it looks like. So they come out of the community coffin after their service, they're transferred into this little cemetery requirement meeting shroud bearer. They're covered up, and then all the flowers that have come from their ceremony travel with them, and it's beautiful and elegant and clean, and it's something we're very proud of. And 90% of our cremations at Natural Grace are shrouded cremation. Things like burial at sea are legal, but you can't do it. I'm speed now, come down to 1 minute. Can't do burial at sea for anybody. You have to have been a serviceman in the Navy, not even any of the other services, or a professional fisherman. And you need permits and everything, but it is possible. It's very expensive, but it's not available to everybody. Donating your body to science is an important thing in our community, but all our families must have a plan B. Because if you die when you're in Bendigo for the weekend, they won't take you. If you die and they're full, they won't take you. If you die on Christmas Day, they can't take you. There's so many reasons as to why you can't, and a family can be quite traumatised. Dad was always going to go to the university. I was like, well, he can't. What are we going to do now? So it's a good plan A, but we do need a plan B. Aquamation is available in Australia now out of New South Wales, and it's a process of reducing a body to the same state from cremation, except through alkaline hydrolysis, which is the movement of water and temperature to actually reduce the body to a liquid waste. And then the bones are ground up in the same manner as they are from cremation. So the ashes you get from that are the same from cremation. I'm going on you guys being medical. Am I being too awful? No. Good, thank you. It kind of creeps me out a little, but it is an option. Human composting, you might have heard about, that has just been legislated in the States, where they are actually going to compost bodies and return compost to families that will contain the trace elements of their families. So kudos to them, it's been a huge project. The mushroom soup is the biggest load of hogwash, as my mother would say, you've ever heard. If you want your body to... has anybody heard of this? No. Oh, my God. Talk about greenwashing. It's dreadful. But anyway, good on them. It's a mushroom pores-infused soot that's supposed to clean and make more rapid the decomposition process. But instead of paying $1,500 or something for one, you could just sprinkle some pores in the grave. But anywho, same with this. Imagine trying to put a dead body in that. Bless them, it's so pretty. But imagine trying to put a dead body. Imagine the poo that would come out of a dead body if you put it into the fetal position to go into that. I.e., coming from the greenest funeral director in the country, there's a lot of greenwashing around death. And if families can just be reminded to wash their dead with warm water, essential oil and love, there's no requirement to embalm it or put it in a fancy coffin or to do anything to it other than to love it, including buying beautiful things like that. Memorialisation of graves in cemeteries. This, I'll finish on this. This is the beautiful Tanya and her baby Jean, who died at 10 months, who shouldn't have survived her birth. And Tanya very kindly comes to our sessions where we educate midwives and birth doulas, called When a Baby Dies. And she nearly always is asked, how did you cope? And she said, my family is comfortable with death. And the reasons, she said, are, we're death literate. This is me liberifying what she said, but she's death literate. They have a language to express death. They have a compassionate community. It's my own friend Siobhan, who died a beautiful, heartbreaking but beautiful death with her young daughter here, was so much part of it. Even at the funeral, she was telling people to roll up, come and sign the forms over here. She was just gorgeous, but out of this incredible community. So we've got death literacy, a compassionate community, and spirituality. And I'm sure that doesn't surprise the room. They had a context through which to express the joy of her birth, the heartbreak of her death, but the hope of what would come. And then I've just found out this week that she's pregnant again. So these are the resources we use. We draw on these all the time for our best possible work, and people that are much smarter than me, but who I steal stuff from all the time. And these are the things that I asked my team. I had team training, and these were the things that they asked me to ask you. What can you do to help the families in your care? Please refer to palliative care. Please do it early. Please do it actively, encouragingly. Please believe in palliative care, because that joint, shared care of actual of treatment or treatment for cure, treatment for comfort, but psychological, social, emotional care, that's where we see it. So please prescribe early and encourage it. Ice in hospitals. The number of times we ask for doctors or nurses to please put ice on their dead after they die. If you think of how warm this room is, if your patient is going to come into our care, but you're waiting for someone to arrive from Sydney and all the things that you all know happens, that person can be here for 8 hours or 6 hours or 4 hours or longer in this temperature. It's all right when you see it, but by the time they get to our care, so if we ring and ask, please put ice on that person's belly and under their neck, we're not being cuckoo, we're just asking you to help us preserve their body in a natural manner. The medical certificate of cause of death, to all the doctors in the room, can you please triple check that the person's middle name is in there? Often medical records don't have the person's middle name, and for families it's heartbreaking because the medical certificate of cause of death becomes our source document. We can't book them into the cemetery. We can't do anything without that certificate, and what's on that certificate is all we can use. So then we're coming back and asking, particularly for middle names and the spelling of names, and that we get them as quickly as you possibly can give them to us. Please develop your death literacy and be interested in your patient's death literacy. Where are they at and what are they doing? And that the little look on your face of disapproval or not knowing can undermine their confidence, because there is no one more important in the family's experience than their doctors. Have you all done an advanced care plan? Practice what you preach. And remember that in 12 months' time, or if that patient or that patient's family come back around your way, that your systems, your internal organisational systems, have a way of remembering that their person died in your care. Resources, a beautiful thing that family wrote about Vigil, and that's my little bit. So thank you.
Thank you, Libby. I feel like you're just hitting your strides, and we sort of cut you off a little bit towards the end. But
I always talk too much.
But your energy and enthusiasm, I think, was gathering momentum, even though it's come from a place of sadness at the moment. So it was important. We gave you the opportunity, and it was great to hear what good work you and your teams are doing within your communities. We have got a couple of minutes for questions. So if anyone's got any comments or questions, please, hands up. Any thoughts?
That was fabulous. Thank you.
Oh, very kind. Thank you.
Is there much pushback from the traditional, like, funeral directors and stuff like that? Are they? I just wonder, like, that you're obviously a threat to their practice, but I mean, is there any pushback against what you're doing?
Look, there was at the start. We were dismissed as, irresponsible and all that sort of thing. I think now that we've been practicing, we're 7 now, and I think what's starting to happen is when families ring and say, "Oh, we want to keep our child at home, and then we want to do this," and they're starting to say, "Oh, you want a natural grace funeral? Here's their number." So nobody's loving us, but they're not. That we're starting to take our place in the thing. It was very tempting to go rogue at the start and not join the industry, but I've got some beautiful mentors in the conventional industry, and they really encouraged me and supported me to back myself, that this can become mainstream, good practice for everybody. We meet all the laws. We never do anything that's not legal, but we're just creative and innovative around it, and we're starting to get some respect from that, so it's good. Thank you. Yeah.
Peter?
Just wondering on the legalities around burial. Can you bury a body in your own coffin?
Yes, so in Victoria, technically under the law, you can get a permit to bury on private ground. It's very difficult to get. In fact, it's basically impossible to get. So yes, but no. Whereas in New South Wales or Tasmania, burial on private ground is very run-of-the-mill. You can get the permit quickly. But if you wanted to bury on the family farm in Victoria, you would want to have done the permits years before you died. Like, it takes years sometimes to get one. And there's so many restrictions, covenants on titles, waterways, the size of the land, blah, 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 blah. Like, it's really extensive. Basically, they don't want us doing it. The Department of Health don't want it happening. So it has to basically be essentially an existing graveyard. You know how on some family farms in particular there is existing graves, they will get permission, but yeah, essentially it's something that's off. And that's why the practice of natural burial and working with cemeteries, they love me. Not really. They're starting to, of saying, "Dear, Chewton Cemetery, there's a family that would like to have a natural burial." What? And then the rabbits are going to dig them up, but that's why natural burial. Oh my God! Come to the bush, people. Come to the bush. That's why the process of natural burial and working with cemetery trusts like Ballarat, and Annie's here from there, is so important, because we need to create authentic and meaningful places for people to bury their dead. And if it can't be your family farm or your backyard, then the next best thing is beautiful cemeteries. Yeah.
Most cemeteries have a bush burial.
A lot of them are, and a lot of them are developing them. And a lot of the practices of natural burial, which is the depth of the grave and no embalming and a shroud and families being involved in the process, that can happen even in your stock standard part of the cemetery. So you can take the practices into the standard cemetery, and then some cemeteries have got natural burial specific areas. Yeah. We don't have a standalone natural burial cemetery in Victoria as yet, but we will one day.
Jenny at the back.
Death duels now, it's not, perhaps I should admit I've not really heard of them until recently, but I am hearing about them, but I don't know how to access them.
Great. So death doulas, I think, are the nation's answer to our healthcare budget for an ageing population. They are absolute rock stars. Like any emerging group, though, there's some that are educated in ways that are possibly more heading towards accreditation than others, and there are certainly different approaches to educating doulas. The only doula college that I will attest to is the Australian Doula College, who do birth practitioning, and their association with Preparing the Way, who have really well educated, really well trained and supervised doulas. There are others, but they're the only ones that I'd recommend. Preparing the Way. Helen Callanan runs that organisation, and really in the next very short period of time, she'll actually be producing Cert 4 accredited, certified doulas, which will be fantastic. And I don't know if it's good or bad, but I contribute to that education program so that doulas aren't just going out. They have to come and hang out with me until I know that they can care for a dead body properly, that they know where their limits are, what's good and what's bad. And the best thing that's coming out of that education is a very clear understanding that they have, and I'm the same, we have no place as medical advisors, guiders. You know, there's nothing to contribute other than to listen to what their medical team are telling them, and to support the family in exercising that. And that's not true for all the ways some of them are taught. So yeah, watch this space on that one. There's some really interesting work happening around it.
Thank you. We've got time for one more. I think just in back there. Thank you.
I was just going to ask about the cooling pad here. So obviously it's harder for people to access the body if they're in a like that. So is that something that you use? At what phase do you use that? That you take the body in and out of it?
Yeah, great. Yeah, it's a great question. So we believe that good practice is to start to cool the body within 2 hours of death. So the process of the body starting to decompose is the bacteria in the gut, and once that kicks in and starts to do its business, that's where you start to get the green colouring and all those things. So if we can shut the gut down simply by cooling it, which we have good success at doing, ideally that would happen within the first 2 hours, and hence why we ask hospitals and aged care and everything to put ice on the person that's died. We like to introduce the cooling system if there's ice been come in there somewhere between 2 to 4 hours, and then to get a good 8-hour or overnight stint in the first night. And what that does is just totally reduce the core temperature of the body to less than 5 degrees, and then you can't regain condition of a dead body. All you can do is take a photo, snapshot of what you've got. And especially when you're not using any chemicals. So we have no chemicals in our care at all. So, but even embalming won't fix that to a certain extent. So you have to snapshot what you've got. So the quicker you cool it, the better you've got that snapshot of that preserved body as best as you can. Then the person stays in their bed. So that piece of equipment comes into the house, and the person's gently rolled, and that separates out. So you've got one layer underneath and one layer that goes on top, and then they Velcro together. Yeah, and they can come out, and they come off as kids come and want to paint nails, or somebody else comes and wants to anoint their feet, or whatever. They come on and off and on and off. But essentially, we try and keep that cooling going, and of course the time of the year. Yeah.
Thank you, Libby. We've just ticked over 6 o'clock. I think it's a good opportunity again to thank Libby for a fantastic presentation, so thank you very much.